Hi everyone, it's Nick Marzinski at trappinglight.com, and this is the third video on this particular Photoshop project. In the last two videos I really talked about selection, how to use the selection tools within Photoshop, as well as using the refine edge tool and layer masking techniques to refine a selection after you've already made it. Now that the image is extracted and masked, I'm going to move into retouching. Now the techniques that I'm going to talk about are going to pretty much apply to any image that you want to retouch. So this isn't simply a here's how to retouch this particular image tutorial. Instead, it's more of a here's how to think about retouching any image. But there's a few things in this particular image that I want to fix. Specifically, I want to fix this blemish right here on my face, as well as some of the lines that I have up on my forehead here. I'm also going to look at the curves on my neck that are here and here, which are caused by the fact that I was wearing a collared shirt. You can see right here, and when that was masked out in the selection process, it introduced some curving onto my neck. We're going to fix that. Finally, I want to fix my eye right here. It's a little lower than this eye, and that doesn't look good, and so I'm going to simply take care of it. And I'm also going to brighten up this side of my face. It looks a little dark, it looks a little shadowy, and we can fix that very, very easily. So let's get started. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer to my image, just a blank layer like that, so that any edits that I'm making are going to be done without destroying any image pixels. This is part of what's called non-destructive editing, and I talked a little bit about it in the last video. And non-destructive editing means that you don't destroy any pixels on your original image when you're making edits, so that you can always get back to that original image. If you're editing directly on the first layer here, any changes that I make will permanently alter my image. By making my changes on a new blank layer, I can always go back to my original image, and that's very, very important in the process in case you ever need to undo a change that you've made. So we're going to do all of our editing today. I'm going to do all of my editing today on these blank layers. So first things first, I'm going to correct the blemish here as well as the lines here. In order to do that, I'm going to start off by using the spot healing brush, which you can find up here on the keyboard, up on the toolbar, or on your keyboard by pressing the J key. To get rid of this blemish, all I have to do is position the spot healing brush over it and click once, and you can see that it's gone. Now I'm using a 40 pixel brush that has actually a pretty decent amount of hardness in here, and I should actually take the hardness down. In order to fix these lines, I can use the spot healing brush to do that, but I don't generally like to. What brush I like to use more is just the simple healing brush tool. The difference between the healing brush and the spot healing brush is that the spot healing brush automatically chooses where it's going to use to sample, whereas with the healing brush, I actually have to choose where it's going to sample. And the reason why I like that is because sometimes when I'm using the spot healing brush where it automatically chooses to sample, it samples something that I don't want it to. By using the actual healing brush where I have to choose where it's going to sample, I can be very clear with Photoshop and say, this is where I want you to look for material to fill in what I'm editing. So in order to do that, it's just like the clone stamp tool, if that's a tool you've ever used. I press and hold the Alt button or the Option button if you're using a Mac, which changes the cursor to a bullseye here. Choose my sample point by clicking on it. Then I release the Alt key and paint over the area that I want to get rid of. And Photoshop will automatically sample based off of where I told it to, and will fill in the area that I want to get rid of. So right there you can see by toggling this layer on and off the changes that I've made pretty quickly and easily. The other thing that I'm going to do on this layer is I'm going to slightly lower the opacity just to make it, to introduce those flaws of the lines again, because sometimes if the opacity is all the way up, those edits can appear very, very stark, and you can see them right within the image. So by lowering the opacity, it sort of feathers those edits onto the image and makes them look a little bit more genuine. Now that that's done, I'm going to be working on my neck. So again, I'm going to add another new layer, and I'm going to call this layer Neck Edits, and I'll call the layer below it Healing Brush Edits. And I'm labeling the layers, and it's a good habit to get into because when we're working with this image, when I'm working with this image, I'm going to be adding more layers to it and more layers to it. And eventually it's easy to have a whole bunch of layers and not remember what each of them do. So by actually naming the layers as you're going through the editing process, when you get to a point where there's several layers in an image, and I've worked with images that have upwards of 20 or 30 layers, you'll be able to look at the layer and go, okay, that's exactly what this particular layer does, so that if you need to go back and change something, you know where you have to go. So on the neck edits, all I'm going to be doing is getting rid of the curves here and here. In order to do that, I'm going to start off by using the polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to simply draw a couple of selections on my neck. Right there. And right there. And the reason why I'm drawing these selections is because when you have a selection and you're working with a retouching tool like the clone stamp tool, which is what I'm going to be using, any painting that you do with that specific tool is going to stay inside of the selection. So by drawing this line right here, and it's not feathered at all when I did it, I know that I'll be able to actually retouch right up to that edge, which is where I want the edge of my neck to be without going over. So that's the reason why I'm using a selection here. It's not to isolate a part of the image to remove it. It's to isolate a part of the image so that I know that all of my edits will only be within that part that I've isolated. So I'm going to grab the clone stamp tool by pressing S on the keyboard. Again, it works similar to the healing brush tool in that I have to choose a sample point by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking. And from there, after I've chosen my sample point, I just go through and paint right over where I want to edit. Now, I'm also going to do a little bit of additional sampling down here just to make it look genuine. If I simply choose all of my samples from one area, sometimes that looks bad and you can see that the same area has been sampled over and over and over again. So in order to not do that, I vary the areas that I'm sampling when I'm working with the clone stamp tool. And again, I'm doing the same thing right over here to fill in that area of the neck. When I'm done with that, I can deselect by pressing Control D. Now you'll see that there's a little bit of a hard edge here, so I can just sample over that just a bit to kind of clean that up so it doesn't look so harsh. These edges don't look great. It looks a little off, but here's the thing about it. This is on a part of the image that really no one is going to look at, so I don't have to kill myself getting that perfectly correct. If I know that, I can probably get away and it's good enough. In some cases, I can do that. And right here, where I know that I'm going to have all of these explosions that are going to be occurring and these spatters that are going to be occurring here, this area of the neck is not one that people are going to be focusing on. Right over here, this edit actually looks pretty good as is. So now that that's all done, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is to fix my eye right here and move it up. Now, as you can see, my eye looks a little bit lower. This eye right here on the left looks a little bit lower than the eye on the right. I'm not sure why that is. Okay, this is not, if I look at myself in the mirror, my eyes look like they're on the same level. But for some reason here, when I took this photograph of myself, this eye seems to look lower. So I'm going to change that. Again, I'm going to be working on a new layer. So I'm going to add a new layer and then I'm going to label it I edit like that. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select my eye. So I'm going to go back to my original layer and using the elliptical marquee, I'm going to draw a selection right around my eye like this and then hit Control C or Command C to copy that. Then I'm going to go up to my new layer and hit Control V or Command V to paste it on there, and you can see right here on the layers palette, all that's on this new layer is this circular selection that I've made of my eye. Using the Move tool, which is up here, or you can press the V key on your keyboard, I'm going to simply use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move my eye up and get it right where I want it. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now that that's done, you can see that there's a little bit of an edge right here. That's the edge of the selection. I didn't feather it, and so you're going to see that there's a little bit of a hard edge. Fortunately, that's fairly easy to fix with a layer mask. So, in order to fix it, I'm going to add a layer mask to my eye edit layer, which is white. As I talked about last time in the video, layer masks, if they're white, they reveal the layer. If they're black, they conceal the layer. This is white, so you can see this edge. What I'm going to do is grab the brush tool and use a brush with a hardness of 0, so it's going to be a soft brush, and a foreground color of black. In order to get there, I can hit the D key to get to my default white and black on the color picks right here, and then just hit X to switch from the foreground to the background. So now my brush is black. Black is going to conceal it, so I'm going to just paint right on the layer mask here. The layer mask is selected. Paint right around there. And we'll just get my eyebrow a little bit better so that it's back in there. And then right around there to hide the edge. And so right now, you can see we've moved it up and the edge is pretty well hidden. Maybe a little bit more painting there. Okay, so now we've fixed the blemishes as well as the neck as well as the eye. There's one additional thing that I want to do, which is to brighten up this side of my image just a little bit. It looks a little too shadowy for me. In order to do that, I need to create a copy of everything that I've done so far. And in order to do that, what I do is I hit the Control, Shift, Alt, and E keys. Or if you're on a Mac, it would be Command, Shift, Option, E. And what that does is that creates an entirely new layer which has all of the edits that came beforehand. Again, this is part of non-destructive editing. We're not actually changing any of the original pixels that we have in the image or any of the edits. We're simply creating a new layer that incorporates all of the edits that we've already done. On this layer, in order to brighten it up, I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to screen. Now this is going to brighten the image up considerably, and what I want to do is I only want the brightness of this image to be on this side of my face. In order to do that, I'm going to need another layer mask. I'm going to be adding a black layer mask, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key while I hit the Add Layer Mask icon, and it adds a black layer mask. Again, white reveals and black conceals. Since it's a black layer mask, you don't see this layer at all. I can turn it on and off. It makes absolutely no change to the image because the entire layer is hidden. Now I'm going to want to reveal this lighter layer on just this side of my face where it's dark. So again, I'm going to use the brush. I'm going to switch my foreground color to white using the X key. The brush is a soft brush. The hardness is set to 0. And I'm just simply going to paint on this side, and you can see that it brightens up this side of my face. Right there. Get under there. Get under the nose. We'll also brighten up the eye here, and we'll do a little bit of image brightening on the eye right there as well. Now, this is probably a bit too bright, but that's easy to change by simply dialing down the opacity just a little bit until I've got the brightness right where I want it. And that, maybe even a little bit lower. That, I think, looks pretty good. The last thing that I'm going to do after I label this layer, brighten image, is I'm going to select all of my retouch edits, the 4 new layers that I've added, and I'm going to hit Control G to group them into a single group so that all of my retouching edits are right within a group. And I'll just label this group Retouching. So this is the after image. That's what it looked like before. Before, after, before, after. So that's it for retouching. Over these last 3 videos, I've been handling kind of the nitty-gritty aspects of editing images, making selections, refining selections, and retouching. Now that that's all out of the way, I'm going to get to the fun part of editing in the next video, where I tone the image and I create the splatter effect. And this next part, for me, is really where the image starts to finally take shape, and it's the most enjoyable part of the process. I hope that you stop in and take a look at it next week, Monday. Again, my name is Nick Marzinski with TrappingLight.com. Have a great weekend, everybody.